Good afternoon, LinkedIn and YouTube. We are simulcasting on both platforms, and we're excited to have you here today. And I'm telling you, today is just going to be phenomenal. I don't use the word brilliant loosely, but there is absolutely no other term to describe my guest today, Pamela Slim. Brilliant is barely even a fair qualification. So I'm so excited to have Pamela here with us, and we're going to talk through a process that I think is going to be just so fantastic for you in your journey of going from corporate life to the self-employed life. So Pam, I want to welcome you on board.
Hello, it's so great to be here with you today, Jeffrey.
Oh my gosh, it's going to be a great conversation. I want to invite anybody watching live, by all means. I don't know how you can't have questions. So to me, anytime Pam is in the room, you must have questions. So feel free to ask your questions. Let us know where you're from even. Let us know what's going on in your world. If you're watching this in replay, please ask your questions in the thread. I will be sure to either address it myself or make sure it gets to Pam. So Pam, here's why I've invited you here today, because after our conversation on my podcast, The Self-Employed Life, I realized you have probably the craziest combination of skills of anyone I've ever met. Literally, that's why I'm caring so much about this audience of corporate folks hoping to go into self-employment. You have the skill set to actually walk the whole journey. You wrote a book called Escape from Cubicle Nation. You have your Main Street Learning Lab about innovation and entrepreneurship. You have your new book, The Widest Net, so that when you're in business, you know what to do with it. And then if you are a thought leader or a subject matter expert, you have the skill set to help people certify their IP. Like your vast amount of experience just blows me away. So that's why I thought, what an interesting journey you can help people bring on. So let's start with the leaving part, the escaping from Cubicle Nation.
Yeah.
What you know where people are at right now. You know where, as I often say, I think this show, I wanted to appeal to people that are sitting on the fence. Mm-hmm. The problem is you sit on the fence too long, you get splinters in your ass. Like at some point you have to get off the fence. So knowing where they're at, what would you suggest is their starting point?
The starting thought is always that hating your job intensely is not a business plan. And I totally can understand where people are. I spent 10 years as a management consultant working inside so many companies. And that's part of what gave me such a passion and an affection for understanding where people are. So I really understand how things can feel really sometimes unbearable if you've been in a situation where you're really unhappy within your corporate job. And for the record, not everybody is, and that's okay. But where you know you're meant to do something else, as soon as possible, you want to really go through the process of zeroing in on what is that business that you want to start that has a function and viability in the market with real people who are not your relatives, who are willing to take out their credit card or create a purchase order to be buying a product or service from you. I have been an early advocate for the last 16 years. Today's the anniversary of starting my blog, Escape from Cubicle Nation, that I started in October. But you want to work on your business on the side where at all possible so that you maintain your income stability before you jump into full-time entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Where I find what I'm getting, the feedback I'm hearing from people, and when you're watching, if this is your experience, I'd love to know that. I find a lot of people get hung up on, as you said, that combination of function and, or I like to say the intersection between meaning and marketability. I find a lot of people get hung up on trying to combine their skill sets. Often, I think because they've grown to hate what they were doing. Mm-hmm. But to me, there's tremendous value in even knowing what you don't want to do, or perhaps perhaps there's an idea in what you want to see differently that you can create from. What suggestions do you have for those initial thoughts, like people turning, what's the alchemy of all this? Like, how do they take what they know, what they do, what they've been doing, and turn it into something that is a viable business?
Yeah, what's important to recognize for different people who are listening is people are going to have a different approach to business based on who they are, what they value, and really what they want out of business. So some people, when they're coming out of corporate, they might be really tired of that all in, always on culture where you're just never have time, sometimes even on vacation where you're getting emailed all the time. And they might want to be choosing the kind of business that gives them more time, more flexibility. And so they might be choosing something for personal reasons that they could sell one to many, that, might be a product where they could find distribution partners for, that is a very, very different kind of business than the kind of business you and I have, which is being in the world of ideas, actively working with people all the time, writing books on topics. There are many different ways that you can be self-employed. So I think just to recognize at first, what are you really looking for in terms of your own life plan? That's in my book, Escape from Cubicle Nation. That's, to me, always the starting place for you to understand how you really want your life to look. Before then, you go through a whole list of things that you want to be doing in your business, because otherwise you can just end up repeating what it is that you might have done in corporate.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing this up, and because I actually think, and that's why I think we're seeing the great resignation, because lifestyle is stepping forward. People are making a choice to put their lifestyle first. And at the end of the day, with everything that I do, it gets down to, I think, helping people design the life of their dreams. I just so happen to think that self-employment is the way to do that. It's not the only way. You can be very happy in a job. But I think that has to come first. You're actually, if I may interject, you're reminding me of a story that I tell in my book, The Self-Employed Life, by this guy named Ted. Like, it's a perfect example of what you're saying. So when Ted reached out to me, Ted was 55, and he had just left a business. It was his third business he had founded, and he left it after 15 years. And when he contacted me for coaching, he'd been listening to the podcast for years. I love the criteria he set forward for what he wanted, because this is how he wanted his life to look. He had said he came as a blank slate. He goes, I have no idea what I want my future to look like. I have no ideas whatsoever about the next business idea. He says, I just know that A, I don't want to put in the same grind. B, I don't want any commitments in my life more than 6 months, because I don't want any commitments more than 6 months. And that includes relationships. He's like, I don't want any commitments in my life more than 6 months. So what we created for him was kind of a timeshare C-suite executive, right? After a lot of study, believe me, it was months of figuring it out and then building it out, but it fit his bill, right? Because he had CFO, CEO, CMO, COO. He had all the C-suite executive roles in his life over his years, his career, but he didn't want any commitments more than 6 months. So we created him. He farms himself out as an interim CEO, or he steps in as a CFO for 6 months, but no contracts more than 6 months, because that's his life by design. So I love that you're bringing that up.
It's so important, because that is one big reason why many people look to work for themselves. For other people, it could be more about the accumulation of wealth, where they might find that they have certain limitations in terms of what it is they can earn in their corporate career, or maybe moving up requires either a location change or continuing education or things like that. So for those folks, looking specifically at financial opportunity that are within the business are going to be really important. So these foundational things, as you're describing, is really part of this journey. And one of the things I said for years at my blog, Escape from Cubicle Nation, was that the most important thing is just to recognize where you are in the process. So if you're early on and you want to leave and you have to get out, but you're exploring different business ideas, it's okay to feel a little bit fuzzy as you test and try different things. That's what you should be doing before then you go all in. Once you've tested something and noticed that it really fits the kind of life that you want to have, and it's very interesting to you, and you see lots of market viability, natural interest, you're beginning to sell some of the early products or services or pilot programs and such things. With that's when then you can begin to take it into, almost like in software, where you take it into another stage of development.
Yeah.
But let yourself be in that stage, which is, again, I will be a broken record today, but the way you think about the role that your current corporate job can play is really important, because when you know that you do now have a timeline out, it can feel different and less overwhelming to you. that can allow you to be very specific about how you always can be delivering on the objectives that your company is paying you for. I think how you are in your day job is the same way you're going to be outside. So I'm never recommending, people just work on their business during corporate time. You want to deliver, but you can also very specifically look at this as an opportunity to take the time to really test and try to build the models of what it is that you want, to talk to people who have been in those roles before. I've had clients who have shadowed other people in their roles to really get a much deeper sense about what that life is like. It's worth it to make that determination. The only if one of the concepts I actually used in my second book, Body of Work, was a loathing scale. So if you imagine that there's a loathing scale, from 1 is I bound out of bed in the morning on Monday and I can't wait to work. And 10 is I feel physically ill to even think about getting up and going to my job, even if I'm logging in from home.
Yeah.
When you are between like the 8 to 10 on the loathing scale, very often a shift into maybe another stable job is a better interim strategy rather than just leaping and going all in on your business.
Yeah.
Because when you're in that state where it's a very toxic environment, or maybe you're just really not a fit, it is really hard to have that kind of openness and creativity that you need in order to take the time to design something. So if you need to do that, that's a positive step. Don't look at it like, oh, once again, I'm deferring my dream by going into another job. It could be the best thing for you. Just be very thoughtful about what that job is that gives you emotional and physical time and energy to work on your business.
I love that you're bringing that. I popped in the screen the selfemployedready.com, which is a 12-month timeline that I developed. The 12 months before leaving your corporate job, after not only my own coaching experience, but I interviewed a lot of people and got some great, things that I hadn't thought of that are smart things to do the 1 year before you leave your job. Of course, if it ends up being 3 months, 6 months, you just have to move a little quicker. But that's what that's there for, selfemployedready.com. But I love the loathing scale. Do you find that, I know my coaching experience, I've worked with a lot of people that quite honestly may have waited a little too long. And that's what I think your idea addresses, because they're like running away from the corporate job. And to a fault, in that they're shutting down the positive experiences of what was gained there. So is there, do you think, an optimal either runway to leave, or is there a danger signs of when you're staying too long to that you're going to get too high in the loathing scale and it's going to have other consequences?
Yeah, a couple of things to tune into and notice that I just continually say, like, from what I've seen, what you've seen over the years, is people have extremely different risk tolerances and risk profiles. People have very different interpretations of what it means to be financially stable. So I've had people, if you look at this combination of financial preparation for entrepreneurship and risk tolerance, I've literally had people who have zero debt. They own their homes home free, or sometimes multiple homes. They have 3 years worth of expenses saved in their savings account. That's not a retirement account, but just pure savings. And they can still be terrified to quit their job. I've known other people who have maybe a week's worth of expenses in their account, and they're like, I trust myself, I'm out of here. And they make it happen. I was kind of more that person when I quit my job 25 years ago. I just, I have a huge tolerance for risk. I know I can make things happen. I knew I was passionate about my field, and it worked out. As a coach, I do not recommend that for folks, because I know myself really, really well. And I'm okay with that because I know that I'm really able to land on my feet. Everybody is different. So you have to know your risk tolerance. And it's one of the reasons why I think it is powerful to work with a coach. A good coach is never going to want to like put you in a situation where you feel like you're pushed to the edge and you're totally terrified. It's about you connecting with an understanding, separating out generalized fear and anxiety, right? Of, I always quote the Chris Farley, I'm going to live in a van down by the river kind of scenario, what happens if I quit my job and nothing works? That is a valid kind of concern to have, that you need to have a mitigating plan for. So a good coach or a mentor, a resource, a peer who's done the same thing can help you to think through some of your risk points from an objective perspective, where you can identify what the risk point is, and then you can come up with a plan that for what you will do in case that happens. So let's say what happens sometimes to some people, they thought they wanted to work for themselves. there was huge right market opportunity, and then all of a sudden something happens that you were totally not anticipating, which means that you can always go back and you can get a job. It's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why you don't really want to be burning your bridges or doing a Jerry Maguire. If you've seen that movie, grab the
Yes.
goldfish, make a big speech,
Yeah.
and basically make it impossible to ever go back on
Yeah.
your word.
Well, it's also, and it's funny, you're pointing out something I don't think I've outwardly ever said before because of the risk of ticking off a few people. But I also think what you're bringing up is that there's this lag I think there's a way in which the coaching industry and I'll even say motivation industry,
Mhm.
if you think of it as an industry, whether that's speaking or memes, there's a way in which, particularly coaching, I think is a little behind how the world has changed. And what I mean by that is that who you and I are dealing with often, or certainly I'm dealing with, are people that have lives in motion, right? They're midlife. I devote an entire chapter to midlife self-employed. It's like the fastest growing sector of people becoming self-employed are people in midlife. So while some coaches and motivator speakers are still out there, tear the Band-Aid off, make the jump, they're behind the societal change that says that, in fact, the average age of the most successful startup businesses is 47 now. It's not the young and hustling in their 20s. The average age of the most successful startups is 47.
Yeah.
Okay. These are people that have lives in motion, which is why you and I think, both do the responsible thing as coaches. It's like, what's your risk tolerance? What's the viability? How do you want to move forward? I think that's so important.
That's right. And it really having a strong financial plan, because it does depend on the nature of your business and what the startup costs are. What I find sometimes for folks who might be interested in more of a service-based business, like becoming a consultant, sometimes within your field, or something that is really built upon your body of work in the corporate structure, that sometimes we think, well, I can get, a domain name for $8.99 and it really doesn't cost much in order to get the business startup. I think about it as if you and I were to start a plumbing business together. If we ever decided to do that, we would know before. Who knows, right?
Right.
But if we did, we would know that we may need to get a truck. We need to get all of our specialized.
Or I should say, speaking as a true self-employed person, it's because you just never know. Like 37 years in, or you're on, how many years in. I always say this. Like, I'm very open. It's like every time I hit a financial bump, I'm like, okay, this might be the one that does me under. I'm like, and then I have to remind myself, 37 years later, that's going to be the one. But in the back of our mind, it's like, this could be the one. So plumbing Pam might not be off the table.
Be open to all options, right?
Right.
25 years for me, but right, like it's really true.
It's just
and
always there.
That's one of the beautiful gifts of knowing that you can make things happen, but like from an investment, if you were to have that kind of business, you would know that there are some hard costs that are related to starting the business. You would know from a marketing startup cost, unless you are marketing to your former employer or people you already really know, there is usually an amount of time that it takes you to be building up your revenue. And of course, when you dig into your financials, understanding the difference between, if you've been used to getting a paycheck, between just the revenue you're generating and the expenses that you actually have to pay, sometimes paying for your own health insurance, all these other things. So I really think it's important for people to have a really solid financial plan. I know a lot of folks I talked to through the years, they might, be in really well-paying, high-paying jobs. They might have money kind of automatically going places like retirement accounts and so forth. There was a really important process often where we would sit down and really look at the numbers. And then where you have beloveds in your life, so you have a partner, you have a spouse, you have children, your whole family, if you all still, are together, and live together, your whole family really goes on this journey with you. And so it's really important to be talking through these kinds of decisions and the implications with the whole family, is my really strong opinion, because that's what has caused a lot of friction in the past. A lot of, partners, spouses, children can be really concerned, right, about what are the implications. And there can be some really good implications, but there also can be things that are really hard to deal with. So just looking at things with your eyes wide open, looking at your fears as the best kind of indicators to what you need, what risks you need to mitigate, is all part of creating a plan. And, as I told you, I'm the first person who was like, I have an idea, I can jump in and do it tomorrow. But I know that there's this decades of experience behind me of knowing I'm not starting from scratch when it comes to building a business model, building an audience, etc.
And it's such a good recommendation to get the family involved. I mean, I also think about how many people that are in their corporate jobs that will say, I'm working 80 hours a week for my family, but they never actually ask their family what their family would prefer. Right.
Yeah.
Which ends up, suddenly you're in that corporate job and you've given your all, honorably, like you've given your all to build up the family and the house and everything that you've built. Huge respect for that. But the problem is sometimes we don't ask our family, and we need to do that when we're heading out in this journey of self-employment to make sure that everybody's goals are on the same. I have a question for you about autonomy, because what I'm seeing and hearing from other people, it seems to be one of the number one reasons why people are leaving, there's great resignation, leaving their jobs. I'm hearing a lot about autonomy. I don't know that's quite it. I think a lot of times, I think what we're seeing is a lot of people are just tired of making concessions in their life. They're looking to have a little more control of their destiny, if you will. I haven't read Escape from Cubicle Nation. I've read your later book, but were you just like really ahead of the time? And what you found when you wrote that book was autonomy? Because that's what I think we're seeing now. People are like, I want to live my own life. All the years, 16 years ago now, when you started the blog, was that the case then too?
It was. I channel a lot of Dan Pink's work from the book Drive about the main drivers for motivation being autonomy, mastery, and purpose, because I find that it's those three factors often together that really are drivers. What I found with so many clients that I worked with is, for some, that is a priority of just being able to set their own hours, or, head out early to coach a kid's, soccer game, or things like that. Mastery and purpose, I know for folks I work with, is a really important value. And in some cases for people, especially working in really, really large companies, I got some actually hilarious kind of, feedback that I included in the book, where people would talk about, working on some PowerPoint deck related to some initiative that they really had no idea, like how it actually related to anything in the real world. And you can find yourself spending, hours and hours and hours on a big initiative. What happens for those who've been in corporate life for a long time, sometimes all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're not working on that initiative again. And so you've literally sacrificed like your weekends and evenings and your health and your relationships for something that you don't feel like is really worth the time. And that, I know for a lot of my core clients, they want to make a real difference in the world, and they want to be working on something that's more like a craft or a vocation where you can really get lit up by learning. I know that's how I was so excited when I first started my blog, coming from being a management consultant. I worked for myself, but that was it. Like, I didn't have an MBA. I was just the most curious person in the world to figure out, what are these different factors that corporate employees need to be thinking about? And, I had more of a context of organizations and growing companies on the inside, but not so much from the early stage startup. Like, to this day, I still feel that same kind of passion and excitement when I'm digging into this world. Like, it still excites me. And to me personally, that's everything in life and business.
Yeah, I agree. So because you crossed this amazing bridge from leaving to, hey, now you're in business. So your latest book, The Widest Net, is just chock full of strategies to move your business forward, to expand your business. And you do such an incredible job, because I just know this is who you are to the core of your being, at helping build community, and believing that that's a strategy, building community, building relationships. So let's now jump ahead. Let's say, we're in business for a couple of years. What, you talk about watering holes, and what are some of if you can give us a high level view of The Widest Net. It's such a comprehensive book, but what would be some of the strategies, particularly being really current? And I mean that because that's why I think you were way ahead of the game with Escape from Cubicle Nation. And I think in a way, The Widest Net is ahead of its time, or just extremely current, in that you're tapping into the way I think most people want to be in business, which is in a more human way.
Yeah.
So what would be some strategies that you would like to see that They're out in business now, 6 months, a year, 3 years.
Yeah,
What
for sure.
strategies you would like to see them focus on?
Yeah. And first, I'll just say I feel sometimes like it's a blessing or a curse to, I feel like I see a little bit further ahead in the
Yeah, you
future
do.
for
Yeah.
what is needed. And
Yeah.
sometimes like I'm talking and it makes perfect sense to me and it takes people a while to catch up. But I've
Yeah.
learned that's part of my unique contribution is, being deep inside things and then noticing the trends of what people need. So
Yeah.
I appreciate, recognizing that.
Yeah.
In the widest net, really when I look at this trilogy of work that I've done, Escape, just helping people to really get out of corporate in a way that's meaningful, that's financially stable, where they can really, be on their feet in a viable business. Body of work, really that work is more about how can you be really thoughtful about what you're actually building. And it's the process in business where you're really looking at the craft, where you're perfecting your customer journey, where you're really digging into your products and services and making the whole experience much better and being very deliberate about what it is that you want to build once you are outside of that corporate environment. The widest net is then how do you create the big picture in a methodical way of how you build audience and how you build community. And it really, you can think about it like an accordion structure. So where you are at a stage, like some of my clients are, where they're really getting ready more to scale their business after having been in business for a while, you can look at a broader view about really how to activate new markets and scale one to many your products and services. But the same methodology, which is 10 steps, each which has a chapter, the same methodology is really the same, even if you're beginning. Because one of the things I found in my work at Escape from Cubicle Nation is I would use the metaphor of Narnia. If anybody's ever read those books, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I used to curl up by the fire and read them voraciously. When people actually make it outside of corporate into full-time entrepreneurship for the first time, it's as if they're going through the wardrobe door into Narnia. Like it just feels like such a different world with different rules, and it's really exciting. In order to get there, to feel like you are not losing your mind, in order to leave really, very well established security and safety that you have in corporate, you need people who can help you on that journey. And so even identifying, I know what a lot of people did in the early days, and they would tell me, they'd say, I was secretly reading your blog, when I was like at lunch and looking around to make sure nobody saw, the title of Escape from Cubicle Nation, in a big part because they wanted to know that they were not the only person who was doing that. So one of the ways I think to really think strategically about building your audience from the very beginning is to create your circles of who it is that you need to have around you to make the journey. And I always talked about in Escape, your peer mentors, people who are at a similar stage as you are of maybe leaving, where you can partner together and talk about ideas and support each other. You have your technical mentors, which are people you might learn specifics about, how to market or set up a sales page or advertise on Facebook, whatever. And then you have your High Council of Jedi Knights, which are self-identified people who you really admire, not only for their body of work, but also for their ethics and their values. And these are really folks that you, whether they know it or not, right? Some of them, you can read their books, you can attend their talks, and really create these circles of support for you as you make your journey. In the widest net, part of my argument is you always need others in order to make the journey. You and I are peers. Very often we actually work with the same clients in different stages and in some different elements of what we both have expertise in. But we know that our main goal is to help them get the results. And for us being partners, we're so much more effective and have so much a broader reach than if we're just trying to hold everything in for ourselves.
Yeah, love that. Hearing you describe the sequence, and I think there's a bigger lesson that kind of loops around to what we were talking about early on, as far as how to develop that viable business, where the ideas come from. I mean, again, right, as right in the beginning, you have this wild sequence of, escape to body of work, to the widest net, to certification of IP, scale one to many. Did you, and I ask this because, did you have that sequence in mind when you set out?
No, I am an author practitioner, and one of the things I love the most is in really the clients that I work with, that is my laboratory. And now for the last 5 years, we've actually had like a physical community laboratory where we just have all kinds of community events and conversations. So it's sort of that experience, accelerated. But I get very fascinated in looking at what are the challenges that my clients have and how can I bring the very best to them to help solve those problems. Very often it's the work of others. So I'm constantly referring them to other people who I know might have specific expertise or, a great method or a great book to solve something. But then I can begin to notice the patterns of what it is that they need. And literally from one book to the next, this, when I doing so much early stage work of encouraging people to, make a solid plan for leaving corporate, I then found many, many more people entering in the space, which is great, writing about entrepreneurship. And to me, the narrative shifted a little bit from, it's important to have a viable business and it can be great to work for yourself to you can only be creative and cool if you work for yourself. You're just a complete sellout and a loser if you work in corporate. That is not true. There are so many amazing people who love that structure, who work in academia or work in government and other places. So I really wrote Body of Work as a way of saying what matters is what you create. Regardless of the work mode, let's create a common framework so that you can move between work modes, which is actually more of the common path for many people, right? They work for corporate, they go off by themselves, they join a partnership or a nonprofit, they go back to corporate. That's the journey people are taking. From there is where I noticed then that people were always asking, I have this great idea, but how can I find an audience? And they were just felt kind of sold short by more transactional tactical things of, start a blog or run Facebook ads or just send 197 emails to people to market your product. It just, it didn't feel strategic and it didn't feel relational. And so that's really what led to this latest book.
Well, the reason I asked that, and this is what I think the important messages for viewers, is that you're not going to have all the answers. You have to trust that things are going to unfold. As I asked that question, I knew what your answer was going to be because I've yet to meet anybody. It might look, we might look at leaders and think that all the dots connect so perfectly, it must have been planned. It rarely, if ever, is. It's getting the ball moving and then having the awareness to see what's next. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever received early on in my career was, for every problem you solve, you introduce a new problem, right? So then it becomes, what do you want to do with that next problem? And one case, you might have plenty of people you can refer to solve that next problem. It may be something that informs you as to what you can do next to serve the same audience. But fundamentally, I just love that advice because if it's of its continuum, like it just allows you to constantly accept where you are and realize the problem you're solving today is going to introduce a new problem that you can continue to develop with, probably serving the same audience, but just at solving their next problem. And if you choose not to, that's okay too. Like, one of the things I spend a lot of my time doing is brand messaging and reworking homepages on websites. The problem it always creates is everybody needs a new website or they need to have it redesigned. I thought about it. I don't want to do it, but I thought about it, building out the design team, but decided I don't want to. I don't want the people management because it would take away my time from my core skill set. So therefore, you just build out a source of, resource of people you can refer to.
Yeah.
So, but it's the awareness of where you can go next. If you're aware that for every problem you solve, you introduce a new problem. So I said, that's what makes your work so fascinating, is that it links together in a fascinating way. I suspected it couldn't possibly be intentional. I mean, Sally Hogshead, right?
Yes, I know her really well.
Yeah. I mean, I've asked her too, because I can't imagine she could possibly have known when she created the fascination assessment, which is phenomenal.
Yes.
I mean, that's rolled out now for nearly 10 years in different iterations. I mean, one of the things that I pointed out to her that she couldn't possibly have known all those years ago, because we just weren't thinking that way in marketing, was here she created the Fascination Advantage assessment that hundreds of thousands of people have probably taken.
Probably
at this
millions
point.
At this point.
Millions have taken. And so everybody in her database, she knows their archetype. And it's marketing brilliance. Like she couldn't.
Yes.
So, right. So now when she emails in the language of that archetype.
Yeah.
Right. That's the best marketing, but she couldn't possibly have known the advantage of that when she created the assessment because it was so long ago. We weren't doing list segmenting, right? But it's
But she comes from such a strong, like an advertising background. She was like this early star when it came to advertising and
she's
copywriting.
brilliant. Yeah.
And a funny story that she actually told me that I had no idea, but in 2000, maybe I think it was like 2006 or 8 or something like that, we were at a conference together. We had both just gotten book deals. And so we were in the ladies' restroom washing our hands, right, chatting as one does. And she was like, I'm working on this next stage. She had written a career book before. And she was like, I'm working on this next stage of my work, but I can't quite figure out like how to tie it together. And she kind of explained it. And I said, well, why don't you just write about like what fascinates you, about that brand? I literally had no idea. And then after I see, right, this huge, now I take no credit at all for her methodology, her marketing and all that. But it was so funny because I had no idea sometimes that random kind of comment, right? Like lit a fire for her. That's my funny Sally Hogshead thing.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic.
But there always are roots as you look at the work that you do. Like actually my degree in college was community development using non-formal education as the tool of social and economic change. And so this was what I chose when I was 18 years old. So in some ways,
we can almost always, right, in hindsight, we can almost guarantee in hindsight, and this is what I want our viewers to understand, like I can almost guarantee in hindsight, you'll be able to connect all the dots. But I don't want that hold anybody out from getting moving, thinking they have to know the path in front of them, because you can't, right? I mean, I did a podcast quite a while ago. It's been a few years that has been, I don't know if it's one of the most popular, but one that people recite back to me more than any other podcast I've ever done. And it was this challenge against goal setting in today's world. And I'm like, I don't know if this whole goal setting thing works. So, I mean, we need to know the direction we're going in. But so the term I coined was that we need to follow what's unfolding. Because I don't know if I get this whole goal setting thing, because we all had goals of clear vision in 2020. And how did that go? Right. So, the point is that, boy, if you can follow what's unfolding, if you can pay attention to what's unfolding, therein lies the opportunities for you to keep going.
Yes.
So, I just think, like I said, your path and the connection of your dots is amazing. And I think it's really important for people to understand that you'll get the connection as you go. You'll get the connection in hindsight. Doesn't mean you have to have the pieces of the puzzle to start off with.
I completely agree.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Pam, like I said, you're such a rare individual. I mean, how your pieces connect and the dots connect is amazing. And like I said, your strategic mind is one for all times. Like it's just, you're so brilliant in your ability to help people make the connections. And you do it in such a heartfelt, centered way that you're just a rare being. So thank you for being in the world, in my world. And I know you just help so many people. So thank you for being here.
I appreciate that so much. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you. I hope you guys, I can't see how you couldn't possibly get tons out of that. So by all means, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the thread. We will be happy to get back to you. We try to be here every Tuesday. I won't be here next Tuesday because I have my daughter visiting me in Miami, but we try to be here almost every Tuesday. So I hope you'll join us again.